Loud. Hello, Poetry Salon Cast listeners. I am Tresha Haefner. I am your hostess with the mostest. And today I am going to be talking with the poet Brenda Cardenas. I'm going to read the shortened version of Brenda's bio. Brenda is the current Wisconsin Poet Laureate, and she has authored Trace from Red Hen Press 2023, winner of the 2023 Society of Midland Authors Award for Poetry, and silver winner of Forward Review's Indie Poetry Prize. She's also the author of Boomerang, Bilingual Press, and three chapbooks. Her poems and essays have also appeared in many literary journals and anthologies, and she co-edited the anthologies Resist Much, Obey Little, Inaugural Poems to the Resistance, and Between the Heart and the Land, Latina Poets in the Midwest. Cardenas is Professor Emerita of English at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and currently serves on the board of directors of Woodland Pattern in Milwaukee. Brenda, I am so excited to get to talk with you today. How are you doing?
Uh, I'm great. I'm really happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation too.
All right. So, as I said, part of what we want to do is just get to know a little bit about the poet behind the poems, the
hmm
woman behind the words. Can you tell me a little bit about where you're at right now? Presumably Wisconsin, but I don't
hmm
know if that's true. So,
Yep.
tell me a
I'm
little bit where you live.
I'm still living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I live in the city proper in a neighborhood called Bayview, which is the south side of the city, kind of southeast side of the city. Um, uh, Across the street from a park. Love the park. And I'm actually, interestingly, living in the home I was born in. My aunt and uncle, I had an aunt and uncle I was very close to who were like second parents to me. They didn't have any children of their own, and my mother and father rented the upper flat from them. And so I was, born in the hospital, but basically they were living up there at the time, and so I spent a lot of time downstairs with my aunt and uncle, and got very close to them. And when they were elderly, I was helping to take care of them quite a bit. And then when they passed away, they left me the house. So my husband and I moved from the house we were in to this one, and I said to him after we were here a few days, "Oh my God, I'm home. I've never felt so much like I'm home." Um,
That that
yeah.
is so amazing. That is so touching. You're only one of two people I know who lives in a house that they grew up in. I've
Uh-huh.
always heard about people who did that. It's always been this strange, mythology to me because
Yeah.
growing up, we moved houses every 4 years. We used to say things like "home is where you hang the for sale sign." Uh,
Oh,
so that is so far away from my experience, but that is so cool that you
yeah.
got to do that. And
Well, we moved away from here when I was, I think, 7 or something like that, around that age, six or maybe
mhm.
six, that we moved not far away, just down the street. I mean,
Oh wow.
just really like less than a mile down the street. So I didn't grow up here my entire childhood, but I always came back to visit. So it's just,
Hmm.
and I have nothing but good memories associated with the place because my aunt was so magical. She was like, I say she was the Mexican Mary Poppins. And, and so I have all good memories. Of course we made it our own.
Yeah.
The whole kitchen got redone from down to the studs, and there were, updates we had to do, but still pretty much it's still that place.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Have you ever lived anywhere outside of Wisconsin?
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. I've lived in multiple different cities within Wisconsin. And then I
Mm.
also lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, for not only for graduate school, I went to graduate school there, but then I stayed I think it was another 3 years, and taught as an adjunct lecturer at both Wayne State University in Detroit and at the University of Michigan. And then I moved from Michigan to Chicago, and I spent 8 or 9 years living in Chicago. And that was just a wonderful time of my life. I absolutely loved it.
Wow.
And, I came back here, it was, I think, 2000, was it 2005? I think it was 2005 I moved back here. And that was when the housing was really explode, like the prices were really high. And there was no way on my teaching salary in Chicago that I could afford to ever buy anything.
Yeah.
I could live week to week, month to month fine, but it was like paycheck to paycheck. So a friend of mine said, "Well, why don't you come home to Milwaukee? And I know of this particular college is hiring, and why don't you see if you can get in? And cost of living is much cheaper here." And so I did that and got that position and came back. And yeah, I was making more money at that time, and the cost of living was less. And it happened to be good timing in terms of a lot of my family members getting older and needing
Yeah.
help. And um, but um, I was just missed Chicago so much. I was moping all the time. I want to go back
Yeah.
to Chicago, and I almost did. I might have done it had it not been that I met my husband. Um,
Ah, yes.
yeah, I met him here, and then that relationship started, and I stuck it out.
There you go. Well, it sounds like you've had some experiences moving around, but mainly the Midwest. I think we'd call
Yeah,
Chicago and all of those places the
yes,
Midwest. But boy, I there's so much to that that's relevant to me and people I know. I have a theory about teaching. They pay teachers just enough to get by, but they don't let you have any more because then you could save
right.
up money and you could afford to leave the teaching profession, and then they'd
Right,
never get you back. That's
right.
my own personal observation. Uh, but yes, I've also done the travel around trying to find the balance between lower cost of living and higher wages, and it's a
Yeah,
topic. It's a topic.
yeah,
Well, I think
yeah.
that kind of brings us to our next topic because we've chosen poems that we are going to read and discuss. And I guess I'm going to ask you to read If All History Were Stuffed in a Jar,
Uh-huh.
because it does touch on some social issues like
Yep.
what we were just talking about. And I'm going to do this. I haven't done this before, but speaking of being a teacher, I know some people are visual learners, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to put the poem up on the screen so those who are watching and not just listening can read along as you read the poem. So when you're ready, give it a read.
Okay. Okay. If all of history were stuffed in a jar, could you count the antelope eyes and owl talons, the suffocating worms, moths, buffalo staining the plains? Could you divine colonizers' gauche lust for the hustle and chase, busloads of gold? Their filthy blankets, their wheezing Anthropocene. Would you shake the jar? Rattle its plastic potpourri, its acrylic aurochs teeth? Could your ears have ever anticipated the blast in uranium, that the word greenhouse would evoke gas chambers, the code that conifers would create to speak with their deciduous neighbors, secret talk like drumbeats? Just think. I might have watched through the mason's glass our final solar eclipse. You might have pried open the lid and stolen an amulet you thought you could use as a shield.
All right. I'm going to leave this up for a moment because I might be picking at specific lines and I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to misquote them. So, part of the reason I wanted to discuss this poem is, well, there's many. It's a beautiful poem. There's great language. There's great literary devices in here. There's great sound devices and
Thank you.
alliteration and so forth. But the main thing, I think, writing politically driven poems or poems of social conscience is so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started writing poetry almost 20 years ago, I was trying to grapple with some of these issues in writing and really did not know how to make it anything but vague and cliche. And this poem
Hmm.
is making it surprising and really specific and very image laden. So
Thank
I'm
you.
just curious, can you tell me a little bit about how you hit on this idea and how you went about writing and constructing this poem?
Well, there were two things. First of all, I write every Friday with a women's writing group, and we do this on Zoom every Friday morning. And one of the exercises, I guess you could call it, that we do is we put up a blank grid or like table, right, with all these little blank squares in it. And this is after we've read a poem. We usually read a poem by somebody else that one of us has found published somewhere. We
Mhm.
read that and we talk about it. And we talk about what it is that the poet is doing that we find interesting or that we might find a way to use in our own work in terms of the craft of the poem, right? And then we bring up this blank grid and we do it on a Google Doc. And we all start filling in the grid with words. Any
Ooh,
words we want. The words can come from the conversation that we just had about the poem that we read. It can come from the conversation we have when we first sign on, where we're all just saying hi to each other. How are you doing? Getting the lowdown on where everybody's at. It can come from your favorite words because they're your favorite words that you like because of their meaning or because of their sound, right? And so we just populate that, and you see everybody's little words coming in at once. And then we turn off our cameras and we turn off our mics and we write for a half an hour. And
mm,
you can use any of the words in the grid, which we call the matrix. You can use any of the words in the matrix that you want to, and you don't have to use any. And sometimes I'll find myself using a lot of them, sometimes a few of them, sometimes none of them, right? Depending on where my head is at and what I want to write. And so the title, I think, came because the word history and the word jar were both in that matrix.
oh,
And
wow.
that's what the beautiful thing about a grid versus a list is that with a grid, you start making relationships between these words just because
Ooh,
you see them both in there, or one happens to be next to another one, or above it or below it, right? And so I those two words were both in the grid. And then I was also, when I saw that and I started playing with it, I also started thinking of Wallace Stevens's poem about the jar. I forgot what that poem is called, but it's a very famous Wallace Stevens poem. And there's a jar set out in the middle of the woods, right?
mhm.
And I mean, this poem has nothing to do with his poem, but just the image of that jar. And so those two things, led me to the title. I started thinking, well, what if we stuffed history in a jar? What kind of things would be in there, right?
Yeah.
And I started thinking of very concrete things, right? And so you have the owl talons and the antelope eyes, and then things people often stuff in jars like moths and worms, right? People put in jars. And then I wanted there to be surprise in the poem, right? So it goes from things you would typically see in a jar, suffocating worms, moths, to something you could never put in a jar, right? Buffalo, right? Buffalo staining the plains. And then that made me think of course, that movement westward, right? And
Yeah.
the way the colonizers slaughtered the buffalo, right? And I mean, I think some lines again came from the grid. I'm sure the word gauche was in there, right?
Hmm.
But when I use a word like that, then what can I do with it, sound wise? So, and I ended up with gauche, lust for the hustle and chase. And then you get that, the sounds all kind of ow and and yeah. But yeah, and so that when I got there, then it just led me to the other things I thought about with colonization, the blankets that carried smallpox, right? The what we have now, the wheezing Anthropocene, right, as we're killing the planet, right? And
Yeah.
it goes from there. Yeah. I'll stop there in
Um,
case you have other questions about it.
I do. I do. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you so much. Because I do. I have so many other questions. One of the things that I'm noticing in reading this poem, I mean, I gotta say, the first line really, it's very unexpected. If you asked me, how do you take history, what would you consider as an emblem or a metaphor for history? I don't know if I would ever come to antelope eyes as the first thing. And yet that's what opens the poem. And I think that's what really intrigued me and drew me in because,
Mhm.
obviously that's something about nature, but, humans have connected with nature as long as we've been alive. So, yeah, of
Yeah.
course, that's about history. And
Hmm.
of course, owl talons are also about history. And then suffocating worms, well, I read that as being, worms eat us. So, something about the dead and the decay
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
everything. Moths, buffalo staining the plains. That's the first time where I'm like, I know the event or the events
Yeah.
or the years and the location that we're specifically talking about. Um,
Uh-huh.
and then for me, I think a lot of it becomes fairly Americana, the buffalo staining the plains. And for
Yeah.
anyone who forgot or didn't know, there's this whole history of moving westward and so many buffalo got slaughtered.
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
do you know the oh my God, who is it? It's Carl Sandburg poem, The Buffalo Are Gone, or it's like the
Mm.
twilight of the Buffalo or Buffalo Parade. It's a short poem,
Hmm.
but just the buffalo are gone, and those who saw the buffalo are gone, and really
Hmm.
short poem about the slaughter of the buffalo
Hmm.
and yeah. Um, I'm wondering if you kind of drill down on the Americana of it, did you think about if we're putting all of history in a jar, did you
Yeah.
feel it's a short poem for all of
Right.
history? A
Yeah.
jar is a short place to put all of history.
Eh.
So, were you at all concerned about what you included, what you didn't include? Was this poem longer at some point? Can you say a little bit about those
I probably
decisions?
I probably should have been more concerned about what I didn't include because you're right, like the rest of the world really isn't in there, except in the fact that the Anthropocene is everywhere, right? And
Yeah,
the idea of greenhouse gases and that's everywhere.
yeah.
Um, and I guess I maybe should have been more concerned about that, but no, it wasn't longer. It was always short like this. I, you know, yeah, I mean, maybe it should be more like if American history were stuffed in a jar, right? But um,
I'm definitely not trying to edit the
yeah,
poem,
yeah,
just so
yeah,
we're
yeah,
clear here.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm poking and
Well, and
interrogating it because
you know,
it's interesting.
as it moves forth, right?
Yeah,
As it moves from those tiny things, right? Those little tiny things that you could actually fit in a jar. And then, except for the buffalo, they come early and you couldn't fit them. But then you get, could your ears have ever anticipated the blast in uranium that the word
yeah,
greenhouse? And that all I think is covers the whole world, right? I mean, the
yeah,
whole world has been affected by that, right?
right.
And I wanted there to be some, little tiny moment of hope. And so I have um, where is it now? The code that conifers would create to speak with their deciduous neighbors, secret talk like drum beats. And there I was thinking of, first of all, the trees that I have read articles that trees literally do talk to one another.
Yes, yeah,
And I was thinking about that. And then just the secret talk, like drum beats, to me that can be a form of resistance, a form of,
mm,
as the drums often were, right? I started thinking about not only in Native American culture were drums used to communicate, but African slaves in this country communicated from one place to the other via drums and drum beats that
yeah,
were coded. And that's when the slave masters took their drums away.
hmm,
So I started thinking about that as a kind of form of rebellion, right? Or resistance, right? And so I had to put that there. I mean, I wrote this close to the time of that solar eclipse, the big
Hmm.
solar eclipse that just happened that I didn't see. I didn't get out to see it anywhere. And that was in the back of my mind. So somehow I got to that, I might have watched through the Mason's glass our final solar eclipse, right? But I don't know. Like for me, language bore this poem. It's born
Hmm.
much more out of language than out of idea. And
Yes.
that's the big difference, I would say, between my work now and my work when I was a much younger poet. Is when I was a younger poet, I would always say, I'm going to write a poem about X. And sometimes I still do that, of course. But
Hmm.
much more often now, it's born out of language. There's a line. I
Mm.
have a line. I put a line together, and the entire poem evolves from that line and from the
Mm.
language. And I'm much more concerned. For me, then it becomes a discovery. I don't know anything about what the poem's going to be about. I have no
Right.
idea, right? And one line one phrase leads to another and it builds itself. It tells
Mm.
me what it's going to be, right? And I think that's much more exciting to me now as a poet, right? Because
Yeah.
languages are that's what we traffic in. You know what I mean? Like and
Yeah.
also I think because I want there to be surprise and all I want to be surprised. I want to learn from what I'm writing, you
Yeah.
know, and yeah, yeah.
I love that you said this, and also I should ask a logistical question. Which of your many books, does this poem appear in?
It doesn't yet. It's new. It's newer. It's a newer poem. It's a post Trace poem. When Trace came out, I don't remember in 2023, but sometime during that year. It was
Huh?
published in a literary magazine called Wisace, which is a magazine. I really like that literary magazine. And it appeared with another poem, at least one other one in their, I think it's their most recent issue.
Yeah.
And so this is will be in the next book. So I've written enough now since Trace, more than
Uh-huh.
enough for a book. But I have to sit down and figure out what works together and what doesn't. Because
I love that.
I did not write it as a project book. I mean, many people are writing project books now. I did not
Yes.
do that. I wrote poems. And you always can find links because we have certain obsessions as
Yes.
poets,
Yes.
you know? I mean, in fact, I have to go through often and I have to get rid of like words I'm obsessed with that I keep using and poem to poem to poem. And it's like, okay, Brenda, right?
Oh,
So,
I
yeah,
definitely want to ask you, and I we're going to return to this poem, but
yeah.
that's a fascinating question. What are the words that you keep using that you have to cut
Well,
out for a bit?
one of them is cave. I have a
Uh-huh.
lot of images in caves. I'm always using cave. Another one is, and I realized like that it appears um, several times in Trace is like tin pan or tin or, like a tin plate. Um,
Mm.
I think what's another one that I noticed? In here, in Trace, there was one that I was like, oh, Brenda, you've got to not use that all the time. Where is it? Granular, the word granular and the word wreckage. And I like to put them together. Granular wreckage is a phrase in one of
Yeah.
the poems in Trace. Yeah, yeah. So,
Oh,
uh,
that's so interesting. Yeah, I've said this to my students and everything, and my, clients. A lot of my students are much older than I am, so it's weird to call them
mhm.
students. But I've said this in workshop a lot. Like for the first couple of years I was a writer, every poem ended with either stars or the moon.
Uh-huh.
Every poem.
Yeah,
It was just
right.
like as soon as I got to stars or moon, the poem ended, and at a certain point, I was just like, no more. You're not allowed.
Uh-huh.
Cut it out. And after that, I challenged myself. I would only write poems that took place in the daylight because I
Hmm.
didn't want to fall back always on stars and moon. We could have a lot of fun just making lists of words that
Yeah.
poets overuse,
Hmm.
and so forth. I'm curious on the flip side of that, are there some like words you've never used that you're going to try to incorporate?
Sure. I mean, that's the beauty of what happens in The Matrix with the
Hmm.
other women is that they throw words in there that I've never used. And that sometimes a few of them I'll have to look up. I won't know what they mean, right? And then
Oh, wow.
I get that word a day email. And when there's a new word that when it's a word I don't know, I will save it. I save
Oh,
that.
wow.
Yeah. And so I go back to those sometimes to those. What I should do is get rid of all those emails, put all those words in a list, right? All the new words that I learned from Word a Day, right? But I really love that you open the email and it's just a word in the definition, you know.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of new words will come to me that, I will use.
That's delightful. One of the problems with not having paper dictionaries and being able to, use dictionary.com is like you don't encounter words on accident anymore.
Right.
Or it's
Right.
harder to, you have to read far and wide, and I feel like my own vocabulary it hasn't shrunk, but it's just failed to grow because I don't
Hmm.
know what I don't know. Um,
Well,
so
one cool thing is when you do use an
mhm.
online thesaurus will give you many words, right? Synonyms. But then if you click on one of those synonyms, it's going to take you to the definition of that word and a whole thing about, so that works maybe a little better than the online dictionary.
I'll keep that in mind. Sometimes I
Hmm.
also will look up things like just unusual words, but then the problem becomes like, is anyone gonna want to read a poem with a lot of words that they
Yeah.
can't understand? So that winds up being, but there's some great words that other poets have introduced me to where I'm like, "Hey, you should use that word more." Like, petrichor I learned not that
Yeah.
long
Uh-huh.
ago.
Uh-huh.
Ziziva is a great one.
Yeah.
But you got to use them sparingly or else
Yeah.
tune out. Bringing it back to this poem, I feel like we've got all of history in this one
Mm.
conversation we're having. Um,
Yeah.
I was really intrigued by the last line, and I love the way that the poem is interrogating the reader, asking, "What would
Mm.
you do with this jar? Like, would you pick it
Mm.
up and would you shake it up?" Which
Hmm.
I think we could read that in a lot of different ways and understand
Hmm.
what is that a metaphor for. But then this last question, or the last full sentence of the poem is, you might have pried open the lid and stolen an amulet you thought you could use as a shield. And I'm
Hmm.
really uh curious, do you feel inclined to weigh in on what you meant by that, or your one interpretation of it? Could you comment on it a little bit?
Well, like any of us, the you in here is could be any of us. It could be
Hmm.
the reader, but it's like the general you as well.
Yeah.
It can also be the narrator, right? The I, right? Speaking it through you. But um, yeah, just that, well, I think for me, it's like we're always so ready to open things up, to disturb things, to open them up. Like if we found a jar full of stuff, how many human beings, I mean, that's just our inclination. How many human beings wouldn't open it, right? Wouldn't
Oh,
open
that's a
it,
good question.
right? How many wouldn't open it and start going, looking around in there? And so many of us would pilfer something, right? Right? Would take something, right? Um, and in this case, it's an amulet that you thought you could use as a shield because I think we need shields from the onslaught of all of the horrible things that are befalling us
Right.
now more than ever. But if you go back to this poem in particular, it's set very much in nature. There's a lot of natural imagery. It uses the Anthropocene, right? So even if we're just thinking about ecological disaster only, right? That would go all the way back to colonization, right? Um, we need a shield. You know, I feel constantly like this onslaught, like I'm always like, ah, right?
You,
Um,
you and me both, yes.
yeah, yeah. Um, so would you have pried open the lid and stolen an amulet? Because an amulet is a kind of shield too, and it's a kind of shield that works through some kind of magic, right?
Yeah, I
There's
know.
some kind of, yeah.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
thinking, should I look that up? Do I trust my own understanding of what that word is? And yes,
Uh-huh.
as I understand it, it's like usually something that is you know, created as some kind of sacred object that's supposed to ward off evil. Uh
Exactly.
yeah, so it is kind of like
Exactly.
a it's got the same purpose as a shield. I mean, the
Uh-huh.
way that I read it also is something like you pull the amulet out. I mean, in some ways, that's like stealing from
Hmm.
history because obviously there's such a long
Hmm.
history of stealing from other people and other
Hmm.
cultures and then, appropriating something as a shield.
Hmm.
Um,
But it might not
and
work. It
I
might
mean,
not work.
yeah, I've never felt that safe with anything. Like
Yeah.
I have this now. I'm sure it's gonna,
Yes.
you know. Yeah, so I think that's the intention then is or that's how I'm reading it
Mhm.
anyways, is like there's a
You
lot of
thought you
doubt in
could.
that last
Yeah.
statement. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not
I
really going
intended
to
that
travel.
doubt
Oh, good.
that you thought you could use as a shield and maybe you can't, right? I mean, maybe we've gone too far, right?
Mm.
With what we've done to, they say we've passed certain milestones, for lack of a better word, in terms of our ability to stop what's happening to the planet, you know.
Yeah, that's such a huge concern. I'm curious, do you have any amulets? Do you keep any amulets or magical talismans around?
That's so great. I love that question. Well, I definitely am a keeper. I,
Uh-huh.
I have difficulty throwing away, and I have to force myself. I am a keeper. And so this house is just full of art and objects. I mean, if I had any more art, I would have to start putting it on the ceiling. you know right now it's all Christmas decorated, so it's like a lot of my normal stuff is put away. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I consider it an amulet, but there's a lot of things like this is a little Olmec statue made of
Wow.
onyx, which is supposed to be protective. um,
Yeah.
I love onyx. I wear a lot of onyx. I have an onyx ring on right now. You
Hmm.
know? Um, so I think things like that, or I have always sitting on my desk. This is a little journal, and it's Angela Davis on the cover. And she says, the quote is, "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time." I look at that every day. So,
Nice.
yeah, I mean, I don't know if those aren't necessarily talisman, but in a way they are, like all these I have little turtles a lot of places. The turtle I think of, what I learned from, I'm not Ojibwa, but I learned from an Ojibwa elder the their story, or at least her interpretation of
Uh-huh.
the way that the turtle saved the world on his back. And it's a beautiful little story that she told. And she would, even the name for the animals, she would have a lot of those names in the Anishinaabe language.
Oh, wow.
I'll never forget, like, ant was a Negog. But, so I do have more than one little turtle around. Yeah, I guess I have a lot of things like that I find. I have an altar in a room that is just has many photographs of my loved ones who have passed on,
Mhm.
along with all kinds of little tiny animals. little,
Oh, wow.
like there's a little turtle with a little burden on his back. There's all these little birds, there's all these little animals on there. And I one time had Dolores Huerta, who worked alongside Cesar Chavez
Uh-huh.
for the United Farm Workers. She slept overnight at my house once, and she loved the altar because she said, I love all the little animalitos.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So
See,
I guess I do.
this is so much more interesting than asking, like, well, and how do you write a sonnet? I want to know all about your relationship to turtles. Another question, more on the subject of language. Are you fluent in Spanish?
Pretty much so. I mean, I wouldn't say 100%,
Uh-huh.
because I grew up hearing it a lot, but also mixed with English, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So it's like I'm fluent in Inglañol
England,
or
I've never heard it that
Spanglish.
way. Yeah, Spanglish is the one that I hear a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's always so fascinating to me because I thought that I was good at languages, and then I lived in Costa Rica for 3 years, and I thought I was picking up a
Oh,
little
that's great.
Spanish. Yeah, well, no, it's great, and it's a wonderful country, and I
Mhm.
certainly have a lot more appreciation now for people who are bilingual, and I'm
Mhm.
always, in California where I grew up, there people were fighting about you shouldn't have two languages in schools. And I'm
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah, it's
oh,
ridiculous.
you hobbled so many
All those
people.
people. Yeah. And I mean, when I go to, like, I was in Mexico this past summer, I can totally make my way around and I understand everything people are saying, almost everything. There might be a vocabulary word I don't know, right?
Yeah,
And I can make myself understood, but there will be
mhm.
some grammatical mistakes or I'll be searching for a word I don't have or don't know,
Yes,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, but I like giving, if I were like, if you said to me, do you want to give a literary theory lecture in Spanish? I would say no. I'm not that fluent, right?
Well, so few people really have to be that fluent, but that's so fantastic. And I know your work incorporates uh more than one language, which I think is great.
Yeah.
It's something that when I work with students who are English is not their first language, I'm usually telling them like, here's all these other poems where people
Mm,
are making that part of the poem. You're not
hmm
fighting against it. You're using that as part
hmm
of the ballast for the poem is that crossover. So yeah, I just think that's I'm very jealous of people who are even remotely fluent in more than one language because
Well, because in
much
every
harder than you think.
And in every
Hmm.
language, right? Words have so many nuances, so
Yes,
many connotations, so much that I always would tell my students, really, yes, use the thesaurus to find the word you really want, but there really is no such thing as a synonym. They're lying to us when they say there isn't, because every word carries its own little shades and tints and tones of meaning. So,
yes,
there are times when I'm writing, there's something where the Spanish word just, I can translate it, but it's just not going to carry the same emotional resonances,
yes. Hmm.
right? And so I leave it in Spanish, or the same thing when you're trying to decide, even in one language, between
Hmm.
which synonym you're going to use. Well, which one has that shade of meaning that you want?
Yeah. Yeah. What's the word for home in Spanish?
Well, it depends again. Casa
Uh-huh.
is how you say house, right? Casa,
Yeah.
and some people would use that for home. But hogar, which really means like, hogar, I think is really like the hearth, but that's
Okay.
a way to say home too, that has that warmer feeling of home versus
Okay.
house.
See, this is what I came
Mhm.
across in Spanish with the few words that I did know, because like casa, I knew casa is house,
Yeah.
and then hogar I did know was like, home furnishings. Like, you'd see stores
Oh,
for things that are like, whatever for your hogar. Like and I had a in Costa Rica who ran a patisserie and he was French. So, of course, I'd go to Costa Rica to practice my French. And I was
Hmm.
asking him to translate what is home in French? Because in French, I know it's like, chez moi is my house, but chez is your house. It's not the same as home. And so, like, that was just one of those areas where I go, I get it. There is no real such thing as a synonym.
Yeah, yeah.
This is why translation is so hard
Oh, it's
because
so
there
hard.
isn't.
So
And what a
hard.
special word home is, and how lucky we are to have that word, but not
Mm.
every language quite has that thing. And then does that mean they don't have that same concept, or do you just have to find a different way of expressing it? Like,
Hmm.
so that became a
Yeah,
whole fun conversation. Um, well, moving on from the personal like that, let's take a look at your second poem.
okay.
The second poem you've chosen, certainly not the second poem that you wrote, but
Yeah,
I asked you for other possible poems to discuss, and you gave me a couple, and I asked you to talk about this one because we had
yeah,
just talked about history and culture
yeah,
and those big concepts, and this one I feel, if I'm understanding it correctly, this one seems to be a little bit more the personal and
yeah.
romantic. So,
The personal and the ridiculous, right? It's
well, I also wanted you to read and discuss this
yeah.
poem because I walked away going,
What?
not sure if I understand it. So, hey, what a
Okay,
perfect
okay.
poem to get to talk to you about.
Yeah,
So go ahead and give it a read.
completely different tone than the other one, right? Middle-aged dreams. So that old lover, the one I didn't remember when I ran into him at a book fair 10 years after we ate strawberries off each other's skin in a steamy tent erected on the sandy bank of a river. The one who approached me all smiles, as if we had eaten those strawberries yesterday, while I cast blank eyes because I thought he might be the long lost friend I had dropped acid with in a house where fish swam around fork and spoon, dipped in and out of coffee cup because, all aquariums are tables set for breakfast. Not that one, but the one who left me driveling in puddles while he drifted across country to join a Buddhist monastery. Yes, that old lover shows up at 4 a.m. I've already married him twice, the second wedding only months before, and now he's leaving me again. I'm standing in a puddle that floods the valley. No, the truck route. Screw all this pastoral shit and admit it, you live on a truck route. About to marry a man I've never seen in my life, nor whose fruit I'd ever want to lick. When I try to shake out the cobwebs and dry my feet on fresh sheets, I tell husband about it, but all he can say is, "Where was I? You mean I wasn't even present on our truck route?" And the dog purr growls, which means she must go out.
All right. Wow. Okay, take a breath. I'll take a breath. You take a breath. I'm counting up. How many periods are in this poem? I think there's only three. I
Not
think I'm
many.
correct. The whole first half of the poem is just one
One
very
sentence.
long sentence. Um, all right, if I'm understanding it correct, so this is a dream,
Yes.
and this is a dream with multiple things going on and
Yeah.
multiple disclosures. So tell me about this one. Tell me about where
Okay.
this is coming from.
So it does come partly out of dream, for sure,
Mhm.
out of a dream that I had. It also comes out of the ridiculousness. I have a set of poems in Trace in the last section of Trace. This one is one of them that's sort of about the ridiculousness or the absurdity of growing older, right? Of middle age, right? Where we find ourselves, I'm 64 now. So I'm actually moving from middle age to just old. But but just that process of aging, how it's so absurd that you walk in front of the mirror and you're like, who is that person? I don't feel that old in my, like doings of every day, but oh my God, like it's just, and then the weird aches and pains and the middle age is its own thing. And so I was thinking about the absurdity of that process. of growing old and being middle-aged, and then of dreams. And
Mm,
I had some dreams. This came from some dreams or a dream, I don't remember. But then it also came from reality. Like there really was a time I had a boyfriend that I really loved, probably the person I've loved most in my life, other than my husband, right? Who
mhm,
I had before this husband, right? Way before. And I was with him for about 3 years. And then we really did break up, and he went off to be in a Buddhist monastery in California.
wow.
And 10 years later, I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was from Madison, Wisconsin. But I always placed him in California because I thought he was going to stay in that monastery for the rest of his life. So, like
Mm,
10 years later, after the relationship was over, at least 10 years, I went to a book fair in Madison. And it was an anthology I had edited, and my co-editor and I were premiering the anthology. So we did our presentation, and then this person comes up to me after and hi, how are you doing? Oh, I'm so glad to see you. And I'm looking at him and I don't know who he is. I don't know who he is. And this was somebody I was in love with. I mean, I was heartbroken when he left. And I did not know who I was looking at. And I'm like, who is this? I sort of recognize him a little bit. Maybe. And then I thought, maybe it's this friend I had way like 30 years ago when I was in, or 20 years, at that time, it might have been 25 years ago when I was in undergrad school, right? He looks kind of like it could be him. And I just, and then, but I went along with it. I didn't act like I didn't know who he was, right? He said, well, you want to have a drink later? And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Let's meet up later. And when we met up later, he said, you didn't know who I was. I said, because, oh, it did dawn on me at the end of the
uh-huh.
conversation. I realized who he was, right?
Oh,
But he
wow.
knew I didn't know who he was. It was just so ridiculous, right? So then there was this other absurdity. And so I wove that true story in as though it were part of the dream,
Hmm.
but then other things were dream, right? Like
Um,
marrying somebody else and all of this stuff, right? You know? And so and I didn't really tell my husband about it all, and he said, well, where the hell was I? I said, you weren't in the dream. So, so this is one that actually does come, a lot of it from real life. But these ridiculous things that happen in real life, right? You tell people, and it's almost like they don't believe, nah, that couldn't have happened.
No, that's
Yeah.
wow. So I'm so curious with this past boyfriend, like had he changed a lot? Did he look really
He
different?
did look different. I mean, we
Uh-huh.
did both look different. I'm sure I did too. We both looked different. The I think part of it was, and now I'm revealing myself to your audience, and they're going to think, "Oh God, what?" But part of it was that when I was in that relationship, he was almost 10 years. He was 9 years younger than me.
Oh
I
wow.
believe I was 28 or something, or 27 and he was 18, or I was 28 and he was 19.
Oh
So he
wow.
looked much younger, right? And when I was in the relationship 10 years later, he had aged, right?
Yeah.
Now
Mm.
I did not spend my life robbing the cradle. That was the only one. My husband now is about 8 months younger than me, and that's it.
Oh wow. Hey, I have no room to judge at all. My husband is 16 years older than I am. And my
There you go.
preference is I've always wanted, almost always dated people or been interested
Older.
in people older than I am.
Yeah, yeah,
But I know plenty of women who are interested in men younger than they are. And
yeah.
I have no room to judge.
And at
To
that time,
judge.
I mean, the reason I even met him is because I had gone back to school. I went to school so many different times.
Hmm.
I had my undergrad degrees were a Bachelor of Arts in English and in history, but they weren't teaching degrees. And then,
Okay.
for a number of reasons, when I found myself living in this little town where I couldn't go to graduate school, I went back and I got certified to teach English and Spanish and had to take all the education credits and then I to teach at the high school level, right? Then I taught at the high school level for a while. Then I went back to graduate school. And after
Wow.
graduate school, I taught at the college level. So I've taught everything from seventh grade to doctoral students.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was wild.
Um,
It was wild.
I
But
imagine
any,
it must keep your mind sharp. You're
oh,
always
it sure
learning new
does.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
never
sure
getting
did.
bored.
I never got bored. No, I never got bored. That's for sure. But um, yeah, I think, but that's why I met somebody so much younger because he was in college for the first time and I was going back to college, right? And he was a Spanish major and I was doing the credits. There were some classes, a few classes I had to take to be able to teach it, right? And so we met in a Spanish linguistics class
Oh,
where we were
wow.
studying linguistics in Spanish, which was crazy enough, right? But that was how that all happened, and he was a potter, he was a visual artist. And what's interesting, he was a visual artist, he was a Buddhist, and he was a bicyclist. He loved bicycling. My husband now, I mean, this relationship was a long time ago, a long time ago. My husband now I met about 20 years ago.
Mm,
We've only been married, I think, 12 years or something.
okay.
He practices Buddhist meditation. He's a big bicyclist and he's a visual artist and he's a poet.
Oh, wow.
And he's a poet,
That's,
right? So there must be something. I'm just attracted to other artists, and something about there must be something about how centered Buddhists are that
oh,
helps me,
yeah.
that helps balance my insanity, my unbalanced.
Absolutely. I mean, no, we're all attracted to the same kind.
Yeah,
Well, I can't make those generalities.
yeah,
Some people
yeah,
I'm sure are very different, but I know what I like. I've got a
yeah,
type, that's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. So I really intended this poem to be funny. And
Yes.
and when I read it to audiences, like when around the time the book was coming out and I was reading this one and a couple of others that go with it that are
Mhm.
also where there's a character named Husband who never gets a name. He's just Husband without the article the, right?
Yes.
He travels through these poems and they all have this
Uh-huh.
absurdity and they're all partially based in dream and they're all kind of dealing with aging, right? The audiences would laugh a lot. This poem
Yeah.
got a lot of laughs, right? So I certainly intended that. And I think that humor is very hard to do in poetry.
Yeah, that's my next question. First of all, like I love that you can have something very funny, and I thought that's why this is such a great pairing with the poem you just read of All of History in a Jar, because I think some poets, um, they
Yeah.
define themselves in a certain way, and maybe it's natural, maybe it's part of something they really work at. But clearly you have a range of styles and moods and
Hmm.
things that you can write about. And I'm just curious, when you go to assemble a book, do you try to put the funny poems in one book and the more serious in another, or do you like to mix it up? I mean, just talk about the difficulty of
Hmm.
being able to have so many different
Yeah.
styles.
Well, I try to mix it up because
Hmm.
I like a book to have different emotions. I like the arc of a book. I think of a when I think of a book, I think of opening with something strong, right? And then the like sort of taking somebody on an emotional or mood wise, right? Has a little bit of evenness and then it sort of moves, it sort of climbs and then it, you know what I mean, slowly, so that it's not like a heart, it's not like the chart of a heart that's beating wildly, right? But
Yeah.
sort of these rolling hills kind of. That's how I sort of think of it when I'm arranging a book. And this book, and this book was not, and again, I don't write project books. Like I admire them so much, but
Mhm.
I've never done one of those. With this book, it was like there's really broader concepts that I think run throughout much of the work. And those are kind of ideas around liminality, liminal spaces, those spaces in between, right?
Mhm.
Hybrid spaces, right? And culturally, like the poems that are about culture, that fits those because it's a liminal space to be, you're between Mexican and American, right? You're there, there's a border between the two countries, right?
Yeah.
Right? And then I also have a lot of poems in this book that are ekphrastic poems that are responding to or inspired by visual art, right?
Mhm.
And there is a kind of a hybridity, a hybrid meeting of the poem, and the piece of art that launched the poem, right? And the kind of third space that's created when you look at the art and then you read the poem, right?
Mhm.
And then I think middle age is another one of those in between spaces. So the poems
Mhm.
that are about aging, right, is fits there too. And also dream. The dream is between sleeping and waking, right? It's another one of those liminal spaces. So
Yeah.
I put books together around larger concepts like that often. And so it's not that all funny poems are in their own book, but in this book, it's the last part of the book that has the poems, the very last section. There's four sections, and the
Mhm.
last section has those funny poems about aging, and then it has some other poems that are sort of about kind of absurd. Like there's one about you would never know this, like it doesn't say it in the poem, and you would never know it from the poem. Is called Going Under, but
Uh-huh.
it's actually about that when you get a colonoscopy and they put you in that twilight or whatever they call it, that twilight
Uh-huh.
sleep, where it's not like injecting you with something that puts you completely out, but you're
Right.
out, but then you're kind of coming back and you can kind of hear them around you talking, right? So that's an altered state that's kind of similar to a dream state, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
So those poems in that section have more of that dream, the absurd, right? Yeah. So that was
That's
how I thought about this book anyway.
yeah, and I love that you're talking about the project book. This is an issue of such debate
Hmm.
between me and people I work with and friends of mine. We're all feeling challenged by that project book
Yeah.
concept.
Yes.
Right? And for anyone who's listening, let me just say, if you don't know what we're talking about, it feels like once upon a time, people who were poets would just collect their best poems from the last couple of years and put them in a book and find a nice order, and that was it. The project
That's what
book
I
is
do.
much more like, hey, all these poems have to be on this topic, or all these poems
Hmm.
have to be a certain form. I mean,
Hmm.
and I agree. I think the project book is a lot. Uh, it's challenging. It's also, I very much admire the people who can do it. It's
Hmm.
lots of fun. It's so much more work. It's become
Hmm.
very, what do we call it? It's the fad now. Everyone's
Hmm.
expected to have one, but not everyone wants to have
Hmm.
one. So,
Right. There
yeah,
is a
I'm just
there is a book, somebody, I can't remember the poet's name, but a poet did write a book called Poetry is Not a Project.
oh wow, okay. Well, look, I'm all for learning and growing. I
Yeah,
hope we get to a point where it can be a great option of many options. So those of
right.
us who like them can focus on them, and those of us who prefer not to
I mean,
can
they're amazing. They
have a little
require a
freedom.
lot of research, right? I mean, oftentimes they're not always, but oftentimes they're kind of documentary
Uh-huh.
poetics, right? And
Hmm.
so that's involving all kinds of research, and they're brilliant. Some of them are brilliant. A poet who does them all the time, there's a poet named Craig Santos Perez, who's a Chamorro native person from Guam. And he
Hmm.
has this whole set of books. I don't know how many there are, five now, six now, called From Unincorporated Territory. And then they each have a different subtitle. And they're all that kind of um, I would say docupoetics and ecopoetics, right? And they're I think he's amazing. He's one of my favorite poets. I love reading his books, but I'm just not there. I just don't
Yeah.
write like that, you know? So yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a number of really fine poets who don't. And
Yeah.
again, I think we can just value them.
Yeah.
we can allow that there's lots of different ways to create a poetry book. Um,
Right.
that's a good segue into another question that I like to ask, which are, who are some of your favorite influences?
Oh my God.
Docu-poetics, project poets or non-project poets,
Yeah.
either way, just some of your current influences might be a better way of asking.
Well, you know what's interesting is that like influence sort of says that they do something that affects the way you write, right? And that is
Hmm.
different question than my favorite poets, because I have a lot of favorite poets who write
Yes.
nothing like I write. I couldn't even
Okay.
begin to write like they write. And I don't even try to write like they write because it would feel false. And yet
Yes.
they're my favorite poets to read, you know? And
Okay, so let me ask you for one of each. One who's an influence and one who's a, what would we call it? Maybe an outfluence.
yeah,
Never going to be like that, but I
I
like to
would
read
I
it.
would say that, you know, in not influence, but like one of my favorite poets to read, I would say is Craig Santos Perez. He is one of
Yes.
my one. I mean, there's many, many, many. I could go on and on for,
Hmm.
we could have 17 hours just talking about some of our favorite poets, right? But I would say, yeah, that he would be one of my, you know, one of my favorite poets of this time, I guess, writing in this time, you know.
Yeah.
And but like influence, I would say like an early influence, and I think there's still a little bit of her mark on my work is Lorna de Cervantes. She was a very early influence.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think I write like him at all, but another one of my favorite poets who is an influence on some of my work is Juan Felipe Herrera. And like I see him in sometimes like he would do these like anaphora poems, right? Where you're
Mhm.
repeating and there's like just a rush to the language. And I have some of those and I can see that. The mixing of English and Spanish, I can see the influence of him there, right? I
Uh-huh.
can see the influence of him now more with the note with the way that I'm much more starting a poem in language than in idea,
Mm,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah. But I think like I would have to really think about that because I think my work is very image driven. It's very
Hmm.
image driven. So, you know, it would probably be poets that are also, right, like really focused on the image, you know, and rendering
Yes.
something. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
I'm delighted. I was lamenting earlier today about how ignorant I am of contemporary poetry, which, you'd think, well, I do this,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's so many great poets out
Yeah.
there.
Oh, there's so many.
And
Yeah.
usually when people come on the podcast and I ask about poets they recommend, I'm going to say nine times out of 10 that they're naming poets who I've never heard of. And then I go away and I go like, oh,
Hmm.
how do you not know that poet? How do you not know that poet?
Hmm.
Bad reader, bad reader. I know who Greg Santos Perez is.
Yay.
I am friends on Facebook with Lorna. I'm
Yeah.
so excited.
That you
I guess
know
all of
these.
my
Yeah.
reading has paid off. I know who
Yeah.
the new poets are.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, another one who I love to read that I don't write anything like is C.D. Wright, you
Okay,
know?
I know her
Uh,
too.
yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
I don't think I could possibly write like her either. She's
Yeah.
another one where I feel like I'm fascinated by you. I'm never going to do what you do, but
Yeah.
I'm fascinated watching
Yeah.
what you do. That's great.
Well, and I think to
Yeah.
some degree our reading is ahead of our writing a lot of times. Our
Yes.
reading is ahead of our writing, if you want to look at it that way, or just different, sometimes, or maybe a better word to use is just different, I mean, I could name really old books that I love too,
Uh-huh.
from, a long time ago, right?
Oh, give me just one favorite non-living poet.
Oh, I don't know if he's living anymore, but I loved James Schuyler's The Morning of the Poem. He
Okay.
might not be living anymore. He was a New York school poet. I don't know if he's alive anymore. I mean, just for the music of it, who doesn't
Hmm.
want to hear the Yeats? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I mean, the music, the internal music of that poetry. And, Emily Dickinson, like I can still read Emily Dickinson over and over again. There's many, 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 you know, poets of from all times.
Yeah, I find this very interesting because when we set up poetry podcasts, sometimes people say, well, I can talk about this book, but it came out like 5 years ago. Do you still
Oh
want
my
to talk
God.
about it? I,
Oh my
have,
God.
what do you mean? Like
Yeah.
where it's not a cabbage. It doesn't rot
Yeah.
after a couple weeks.
Oh
No,
my
it's
God.
supposed to last forever.
Yes.
Like talk to me about the book you wrote 20 years ago. I hope it's
Yeah.
still relevant.
Oh
Um,
yeah. 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 That's kind of crazy, that notion that, that I was on a panel once at
uh-huh.
AWP that was called, what was it called? Something about poetry's not a race or something. And we were
Mm-hmm.
all poets that had taken a really long time between books. And
Mm,
we talked about that you don't have to feel like this idea that you got to like snap out a book every year. That's crazy. I mean,
yeah.
I
This is the thing I've been thinking about in capitalism.
yeah,
We're all talking about that, I think,
yeah.
and productivity and the idea that you have to produce so much, it really has a negative effect. And I keep returning to something I read about how Elizabeth Bishop, I think, only wrote or finished and published like 120 poems in her life. And I
Uh-huh.
know all these other poets who are just like, well, you got to write one a day and get. And as a reader, I go, please stop. You're overwhelming me already.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
already can't keep up. So, this idea that we have to produce so many, why?
Yeah,
Why?
yeah, yeah. I don't,
There's enough.
instead do something good, really great. I mean, like I'm thinking of Eduardo Corral, who is a poet whose work is I love for its lyricism. And I
Yeah.
think he has, is it just the two books? It might be two. It might be three, but I don't think so. I think it's two, and he's been writing a long time. And the both books were huge successes, right?
Yeah.
But he takes his time, and when you listen to him talk about what he does, his revision process, it's stunning. I mean, like he takes every poem and he tries it in couplets, and then he refashions it into triplets or tercets, and then he tries it this way and that way. He like takes every poem through this crazy number of revisions, right?
Yeah.
And it shows in the work. The work is
Yeah.
so solid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when he puts out a book, it's amazing, you know.
I'm really curious then with you. I used to ask this question all the time about the revision process. And then what I found was like half the time I was getting people saying, well, I put it in couplets. And I was just
Oh, oh, oh.
I guess we all do that now. We just put
Yeah,
things in couplets and that's your revision. So I stopped asking that question because I felt I was getting so many of the same answers. No shade to anyone. That's a great
yeah.
exercise. But I'm really more interested in like, was there some huge revelation in the revision, or is there something like you didn't know you wanted to say until after
Hmm.
the end of the poem? Could you say a little bit about either of the two poems or any poem you've written where you're like, the editing process really revealed something to me? I know that's a big question to just
That
drop
that
on
that
you here.
yeah, it's a big question. I think it depends on whether or not I'm radically revising a poem or whether or not I am futzing with a poem.
Yeah.
Some poems come out closer to done, and I just play with them a little bit. Other
Hmm.
ones, it's like, gosh, I don't know. Like, I really like the language, but Brenda, don't let yourself be swooned by that. Is the poem, I want my poems to have some mystery. I want
Yeah.
there to be some mystery there because I think that's one of the like, this might be too exaggerated a word, but kind of one of the sacred things about poetry. I
Hmm.
want there to be some mystery. I don't want to necessarily write a poem that everybody's going to go home and interpret the same way, even
Right.
though I have written those. I like my poems better that people get different understandings, right? But
Yeah.
I don't want it to be completely obscure, right? So
Yeah.
so there's that work with sometimes it's I know everybody says this, but it's so true. It's letting it sit for a while. I have to come
Mm-hmm.
back to it with fresh eyes. And then I have to try to read it as though I weren't me, right?
Yes.
And what am I going to take away from this poem? What am I going to understand? What am I going to, you know what I mean? And so there's that kind of revision. Um, for me in the past, it's often been my revisions have often been, this is going to sound, it doesn't necessarily follow from what I was just saying, but I've often had to strip my poems down, take things away because
Hmm.
I overwrite. And I would just
Mm.
overwrite, and then have to take things away now. And I think it's part of the process of working with my writing group and getting drafts in only a half an hour. They're
Yeah.
short. So now I'm more often building into them. Okay, I really want to build, I should really build a whole section here or a whole stanza into this, right? To make it. And of course I'm always revising as I'm writing because sound is the other thing. Sound is really important to me as a poet. The music, what I call the internal music of the poem. So
Mm.
as I'm writing, I will write a few lines and then I have to stop and read it aloud. I have to hear it.
Right.
I have to hear the cadence. I have to hear how the words are rubbing up against one another, you know. Um, and so I'm stopping all the time and reading aloud and then maybe making changes and then smaller changes, but making changes and then going back and writing some more, reading aloud, making changes, right? So I mean, some poems like all I do is fiddle, and other poems I really leave sit for a while. One poem I wrote called what the hell was it called? It was in Boomerang, and it was called At the Base of the Blues Tree. Una
Hmm.
ofrenda for Jimmy Davis, or an offering for Jimmy Davis. And that was a poem that was trying to do a lot of things. And I took
Mm.
it to a workshop, and one of the women in the workshop said, I think you're just trying to do too much in this poem. I think this is really three poems. And I was
Yep.
like, no, damn it, this is one poem, right? But I let that poem sit for years before I came
Uh-huh.
back and actually finished it. And it's a poem that is a friend of mine. When I lived in Chicago, I lived in Pilsen, and a good friend of mine is an artist, beautiful artist named Roberto Valadez, and he was doing portraits. He had done these portraits of all of these blues men, the
Mm.
Delta blues singers that used to play at Maxwell Street, which was very near to
Hmm.
Pilsen, right? And so he was a child that was an immigrant from Mexico, came with his family when he was a little boy, was used to Mexican music and then found the blues and just like grew into the blues and fell in love with the blues. And when I lived there in Pilsen, sometimes those blues men would come over to Pilsen to 18th Street, and we'd go up on the roof where my friend Pete had a place where he was on the second story, and you could climb through the window and go out on the roof, and those guys would have sessions. It was
Hmm.
amazing, right? And so Roberto the artist was having a big show, an exhibit of all of his blues paintings, and most of them were portraits, but one of them was called the Blue Audible Day Blues or the Blues Tree, which was this
Mm,
thing at Maxwell Street, this tree, a real tree at Maxwell Street where they all played, right? And so the painting was a painting of the tree and these garbage cans, right, with flames in them. And the guitar sitting up on the amp, and it was Jimmy Davis's guitar, and the beer can. And he said, will you write a poem for the opening of the exhibit for this, painting, and then, we'll read it at my opening. And so the poem was ekphrastic in that it was responding to the painting, but it was also responding to the music. Like it
mm,
needed to be musical because it was responding to that music. It was also telling history because it was talking about the bluesmen, the Delta bluesmen that came up, on the Mississippi Delta, on the trains, and the kinds of work that people did in Chicago. Like it was capturing Maxwell Street, and it was trying to capture how Maxwell Street was sort of this meeting point between the African American community and the Latino community because it was kind of
mm,
close to both of the areas where a lot of folks of those cultures lived, and they would come to Maxwell. It was trying
mm,
to do a lot of things, and it's one of my favorite poems now. I mean,
mhm.
it's the one poem in Boomerang that I still read a lot. Not the only one. There's a couple in that book, but you usually leave the old work and you read the new work, right? But I read that poem a lot. And part of it was because it was such a challenge. But I think I
Yeah.
managed it. I think I managed to weave all that together in the end.
Well, I think my next question is, do you have that poem handy? Would it take you long to find it?
It wouldn't. It's a little bit longer of a poem if that's okay, not pages and pages, but okay.
Fine by
It wouldn't. Just have to grab the
me.
book. Be right back.
Take your time. Um, while she's away, I'm just going to say, in case you guys don't know, Craig Santos Perez, I know him because I was introduced to him through the fantastic podcast, Poetry Unbound. And I believe Padre Gotuma read some poems, at least one or two poems of his on Poetry Unbound. So if you don't know his work, that's a great way to get introduced to it. And Edward Corral, I know because Jose Hernandez Diaz mentioned him on the podcast. So that's how I know those two poets. And I'm going to recommend you guys look those those guys up as well. Um,
Okay,
I filled the silence by talking a little bit
Yeah.
more about the poetic influences. But yeah, as soon as you're ready, go ahead and give this one a read.
Okay, so this is called At the Base of the Blues Tree, Una Ofrenda for Jimmy Davis, Chicago blues man. An ofrenda just means like an offering or an altar. It can be as well. After the painting Arable de Blues or Blues Tree by Roberto Valadez. The hands of this telling tree pull him from the cobalt bowl of sky. Bring Jimmy back to the ruins of Maxwell Street, hunched in dusk. He stood where strings intersected frets like tracks meeting ties on the Illinois Central's passage from the Mississippi Delta. Then followed breadcrumbs of troubadours to this steel city. 12-hour shifts beckoned Mexicanos north on the Union Pacific from Piedras Negras to Pilsen, back of the yards. How many grandparents, mothers, and fathers pounded steak into soil, snuck or were shoved into boxcars, leapt onto the train's iron rungs as it shuddered along the rails to foundries where they poured molten metal, faced hot licks of the blast furnaces growl and hiss. How many lugged themselves north to slaughterhouses that drooled rank puddles at their feet? This so sons and daughters might step off into another era, choose instruments of wood and metal, axes of their own timbre. This so Jimmy might mix his own palette, tune each turquoise pitch and purple tone into an electric blues old as corridos, but new to the Mexicanos who came each Sunday to the market at Maxwell. New to the ears of Roberto, a boy who would keep his ranchera rhythms close as a pair of old jeans, but grow into the blues as he listened to the airs of Papa Jackson, Johnny Young, Howlin' Wolf, Nighthawk, and Maxwell Jimmy. Now Roberto sits in overalls at an easel, splits the hairs of his brush over how to compose this ofrenda, this homage, how to take Jimmy back in time to the market whose merchants once hustled with tricks for trade ancient as Africa, as Toltec Mexico, Maxwell, whose live blues bands and car radios belting norteño mixes made every Sunday a session. How to take Jimmy back to Maxwell's gathering spot, where he guzzles from an aluminum garden blooming atop his amp, swings his axe, fingers climbing its trunk, plucking twigs, while our feet tap the roots of this wailing tree. Notes skip through alleys of his voice like gravel pinging off windshields, lift a pitch high enough to singe the autumn sky, cousin to the red and green gritos of the barrio only blocks away. 12 bars spin like metal rims, stack like hubcaps, chords crackling in the tin barrels of his laughter. When people gather, he sputters, "What did the one eyed woman say?" and waits for them to peer into the devil's draw of his eyes before he roars, "Where is my one eyed man?" But we barely get to the punchline, to the end of a set before the mayor swings his axe, a claw that rips this Arbol de Blues up by its roots, before Chicago swings its wrecking ball to level homes, stores, restaurants, bars, before troops graffiti blast, scrunch, and cinch sack it all, but one empty wall where someone has scrawled Jimmy's name among the others in this Hall of Fame. Willie, Hound Dog, Honey Boy, Sal, the many legends who've shared the marrow of their music, of Santana's hearty soup with the bones still in it, steaming with sabor and sometimes weeping.
Ooh, um, I can see why you like reading that one, especially with the voices and the characters. And that's a great poem for reading because it's got so much drama and art and
Yeah.
presentation. Yeah, I
Thank
can,
you.
oh man, I can see why
Thank you.
after you write something like that, you keep bringing it back. So this was one that they told you to break into three, and you said no, I'm keeping this as one.
Yes. Yeah.
And
But I had to figure out how to do it.
yeah, yeah. Well, it certainly sounds like it's all of a piece. Um, I know this might be another complicated question, but could you summarize how you did it? Like, what was there, was there like a specific exercise or a rule you gave yourself or something to say, this is how I'm going to bring all these pieces together?
I don't remember. It's so long ago that I don't remember. You know, well, I think part of it is where do you start? And I guess because it was called At the Base of the Blues Tree, I figured I had to start with the tree, right? So I
Okay.
started with the line, "The hands of this telling tree pull him from the cobalt bowl of sky." And that was also starting with the painting because it's an
Hmm.
ekphrastic poem too, right? So the painting has this sky that's really this beautiful blue, right? This cobalt. Um, Bring Jimmy back. So I'm telling you
Hmm.
there, Jimmy Davis was deceased by this time. And
Hmm.
some people say that, the ruin of Maxwell Street and the way that the city got rid of it was so heartbreaking to him that, it
Hmm.
may have been part of why he died, but so I knew I needed to situate you as a reader.
Hmm.
to bring Jimmy back, right, to the ruins of Maxwell Street. So you would
Hmm.
have a character, a main character that this was going to be about. You would have a setting, Maxwell Street, right? You would have, the tree, right? That's in the painting. And so part of it was figuring out where to begin, right? And then giving the history early, right, of the blues of people who took these different trains to the city, right? And
Yeah.
came to work in the um, slaughterhouses and foundries and stuff like that. Chicago, lot of slaughterhouses at that time, right? And then I think the rest of it was kind of, I don't remember for sure, but I think it was kind of weaving. How can I weave? How can I tell this story, J- Jimmy's story and the story of Maxwell Street? And how can I bring the painter into it too? Because
Hmm.
the whole poem is stemming from looking at the painting. So I wanted to bring the painter, the artist in as a character. And so he comes
Hmm.
in when he's sitting at the easel trying to figure out, how do I do this? How do I pay homage to this great blues musician, right? And I guess it was that, and how can I weave um the bits of this story in with the bits of culture, right? The African American, the Mexican American. Yeah, I'm speaking in vague. I can't give you a
No,
specific
that is,
because it's so long
Brenda,
ago,
that is
you know.
that
Yeah,
is so helpful though. I think, if nothing else, what I'm taking away is like find an anchor point. You're right,
yeah,
the blue tree. And then of course it is contained because it seems to be all in that setting, if nothing else, the
yeah,
setting of the painting.
yeah.
But that you know what? That's not your job. You don't have to tell me. I'm gonna get a copy of it and I'm gonna read it with a highlighter in one hand and pencil in the other to take notes. And
Uh-huh.
uh and sit with the poetry salon students and analyze it and we'll all we'll
Yeah.
all talk about how it's working and why it's working. uh
I think
yeah.
the endings are hard too. How do we end a poem? You know what I mean? Like where's the end? And in the end, I felt like I had to go back to Maxwell Street now with the tree gone, right? And what
Mhm.
is left of that? What is left of the history of these bluesmen there? And all it
Yeah.
was graffiti on a wall. And I had to
Yeah.
go back to the names on the wall to say when I had to end with them because to say we're not going to let you erase them.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
going to let you erase them. You know?
Well, and that's the thing.
It-
It's a big story. So
yeah.
how could you? I, this is very inside baseball, and only the poets are going to care about this, and only the
Yeah.
poets who workshop a lot are going to care about this. But I frequently get the advice to break a long poem into 2 bits, 3 bits, three
Yeah.
poems. I frequently get that advice. I frequently give that advice, and I've also heard people say, someone gave me that advice and it was wrong. And here's how I wrote the poem so that it was just one long poem that worked together. And so now I have to question every time I'm getting or giving that advice.
Yeah.
Is that the best thing to do, or is there a way to make a long poem work as a really long poem? But
I think a lot of
um
times the answer is cantos. I didn't do this with this. I used stanzas. But a lot of times,
mhm,
cantos meaning the one, two, three. Where you
mhm,
have like section one poem, section two poem, but they're all under one title.
huh,
I
yes.
think that's a good way to deal with the long poem.
Well, that's what I was just telling a poet today who writes wonderful long poems. I said, like, your goal for 2026, if I may assign you one, you're only writing sonnets. You can write a crown of sonnets,
Yeah.
but they got to be sonnets. And I got that idea mainly from Dorothy Chan, who I have to credit because
Uh-huh.
she writes sonnets and she writes crowns of sonnets. And I've heard Charles Harper Webb, when he was a newer poet, just took a year to only write sonnets so he could
Yeah.
kind of discipline himself on what the form should be. And now he writes very long poems. So, um, speaking of endings, I did want to ask this one other question
Yeah.
about um the middle-aged dreams.
Ends with the dog.
And yeah, I was so interested in the way you ended the poem because it's all about the boyfriend, the
Yeah.
husband, the dream, and and there is no resolution. It's just, and the dog purr growls, which means she
She
must go out,
must go
and that's where the
out.
poem ends. Can you say a little bit about how
Why
that
I
ending came to be and why you chose that for the ending?
Well, to be honest, it may have been lazy because it does come out of truth. It comes out of truth. Our dog, my dog, she's a mutt and she's our dog. She's got these breeds in her where she's border collie, blue heeler, and
Mhm,
pit bull. So she's
mhm.
she's smart as she's amazing. But she actually purr growls. She has a kind of when she wants you to go out, when she wants to go out, sometimes it's a bark, but often in the morning, it's what I call a purr growl. It's kind of like
Uh-huh.
like it's just kind of right. And and it's like, okay, get up now, take me out. And I was thinking about that. It wasn't complete laziness, that it was just reality, but I was thinking about that. That's how dreams end too. Dreams end abruptly.
Yes.
We get woken up by something, whatever it is, and we don't even know what it is. Sometimes it's just a little sound or something that's pulled us out of the dream, but all of a
Yep.
sudden the dream is over, right? And the dream doesn't come to a nice tied in a bow conclusion, right? It just cuts off, right? And so we're left, and then we're left there in the morning if we're lucky enough to remember it. A lot of my dreams I don't remember because my husband gets up way earlier than me. He gets up at 5 in the morning,
Oh,
and
wow.
he's I'm retired from full-time work. I retired. I'm just doing the poet laureateship, which is really like a full-time job, right?
Yeah,
But
I'm just doing the poet
yeah,
laureateship. That's
he
quite a statement on its own.
he is semi-retired. He's retired from his big job, and he's just does this little thing he does, but he doesn't have to go till 10 o'clock. And he goes down in his room. He's got a really nice, we finished the basement for him with it's all his book. He's a bibliophile, so we have enough books to actually fill a community library. And I'm not exaggerating, right? So we did all built in the wall bookcases for him. And he goes down there and he writes and draws and reads all morning until like maybe an hour before he has to go to work. And then he comes up and he crawls in bed with me again and he wants to snuggle. And we bring the
Mm.
dog in and the three of us have snuggle time, right? And so it was just what he does. He was there, right? And I'm telling him about the dream because luckily I didn't start talking about something else or I would have forgotten it.
Yes.
And he's just like, well, where was I? You were there, right? Um, you know, and I was just trying to end it funny too, right? I wasn't even present
Right.
on a truck route because I had the thing earlier about stop it with all this. You live on a truck route, right? Be honest, be real, right? And then, and the dog purr growls, right? And now we just go on to regular life, right? Um,
And this comes up in workshop a lot too. People saying like, "Well, it just happened that way," or
eh,
and it's lazy, and I can't explain it. The thing is, like, life gives us poems, and I think our intuition knows things, and there's moments where it just works naturally. And some people think, well, because I didn't work at it, or because I didn't struggle or suffer, it
yeah,
must have been laziness, or I didn't. No, no, no.
yeah.
It's just you being attentive to the natural rhythms of beginnings and endings, and that's a perfect way to end the
Well,
poem.
because
Uh,
dreams and things like dreams and also be aging, that isn't stuff
yeah.
that just gets wrapped up neatly. I mean, yes, one day we die, but I mean, it doesn't have a nice, tied up ending. You go on the next day and you're still middle-aged and you're still moving toward
Right.
your mortality, right?
Well, I did have a thought on why the poem is called Middle Age Dreams. And yeah, it seems like this is a poem that can only happen after you've lived long enough to have a boyfriend and then go away and then meet them again and realize they've aged
Yeah.
so much that they look different. Like this, I don't have that big, but yeah, that idea that it doesn't all resolve neatly, which is a thing
Right.
that I'm 41, which is young by
Mhm.
some people's standards and old by my 20-year-old standards.
Uh,
And I'm just moving into this age that like possibly we can call, early middle age
mhm.
or late young age or whatever. And I'm just like
Mhm.
starting to understand what all the poets are talking about when they
Yeah.
talk about aging.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't all resolve.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't all resolve, and it just what the weirdest thing I find about it right now at 64 is that in not I'm not talking I definitely have more aches and pains than I had when I was younger. My sciatic nerve is always bothering me, right? Like I definitely have that stuff. My knees are starting to, right? But it isn't I don't mean how I feel in my body necessarily, but I inside my mind don't feel 64. I still
Yes.
feel like I felt when I was 40 or when I was, you know what I mean? Like I don't feel that old. But when I feel the sciatic nerve or the knees or I look in the mirror, I'm like, oh shit, you really are that old. All right.
Yep.
Or, we bring up the Christmas decorations like, oh my God, it's going to take me weeks to do this. Whereas before it'd be like, I'd get it done right away. And my husband's like, you got to cut back. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I do. I think I'm going to give some of this away at the end of this season. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's where the writing comes in. I mean, it's one of many places. There's lots of
Yeah.
really young writers who I'm super jealous of
Oh,
how
yeah. They're just
boy, how
brilliant.
they're knocking it
They're
out of the
born
park.
brilliant. Yeah.
Well, I think there's also something about there's more writing and writing workshops and people teaching you how to be a better
Hmm.
writer earlier on, and that's more available. And then there's like, slam poetry has really expanded the
Hmm.
reach into the next
Hmm.
generation. So I mean, it's not just that they're born brilliant. They've also
Yeah.
had some resources that we haven't
Yeah.
had or we
Yeah.
didn't have. So that's all to say, like it's a thing that can be learned.
Yeah.
On that note, you probably saw my cat was jumping
Yeah.
up here wanting to be
Yeah.
fed. That's the second time my sister's called because she
Okay.
usually is I'm usually free at this hour.
Okay.
Brenda, we could talk forever. I would
Yeah.
love to like just keep hearing more from you. And I will keep hearing more by reading your poems. And I just want to say, readers, Praise is the newest book from Red Hen Press,
Yeah.
but you've got a ton of books and you've already got another one in the works. So please put Brenda Cardenas on your reading list. Please get her books, get her work, check out other interviews she's done. And Brenda, thank you so much. I
Thank
hope I get to see
you.
you again.
Oh, I do too. Thank you so much. I so enjoyed this and I so want to read your books. So please send me an email with some of your titles
Absolutely.
if that email will be a reminder too, then I can send you a copy of the Blue Street poem.
I would
I can
love that. I
email
would
it
love
to you.
that so
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
Thank
Or
you so much.
I can even, if you put an address, if you give me a snail mail address, because Boomerang is pretty much, I think I have all the remaining copies of this book now. You might be able to still get it, but I have the press is changing a lot. The press that published this book was Bilingual Press, and so they shipped me all the remaining copies. So I have them, and I just sell them when I go to readings. But I got this batch for free, so I will just send you one for free.
Thank you
Just
so much.
send me, yeah.
You'll get an email from me within the next 5 minutes.
Okay.
Uh, Everyone else go buy Boomerang, go buy Trace, go buy the other poems. Stay tuned for more from us from the Poetry Salon. And Brenda, I don't know when we'll meet in person, but one day I look forward to meeting you in person, sitting down
Yep,
and talking
me
more
too.
poetry with you.
Me too.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.